Hello, hello, welcome
Hello.
to another MSI Insider live stream. And as you can see, I'm not alone. I'm here with the one and only.
De Rutswane, apparently.
It's even in your name tag, the Rutswane.
I didn't know.
I think a lot of our regulars in the chat already know if you're here, what's going to happen. Because you're always here when we're going to do live demonstrations, benchmarks.
Benchmarking, yeah, performance, power and cooling and yeah, some bias settings.
Yes,
so,
for
yeah,
sure.
We're
So
going to show it. Yeah.
a couple of weeks ago, we actually also had you in our live stream. That was, of course, with the AM5 launch, so the Ryzen 7000 series, in combination with X670. Of course, now there's B650 as well. We also had a live stream about that. So make sure to check it out if you're interested in those as well. We also had a dedicated live stream about our Z790 motherboards already, but at that time we couldn't show you the 13th gen Intel Core processors yet. So that's actually what we're going to do today, because today Intel is launching the 13th generation Intel Core processors, which means we can now show you everything of them. So in terms of performance, as you can see in front of us, there are actually two demonstration systems. Usually we always basically test the highest end model in a series.
That's this one?
Yeah, so today we also have that. That's the Core i9 13900K. But we have a second system today in front of me, and
that's this one.
That's more of a price performance system. Cool thing of Intel, of course, is you can use it with the previous generation motherboards, but also DDR4 memory. So we're using a DDR4 system here, based on the Core i5 13600K. Also, so you get a bit of an idea how that runs. So we're also running more of a mid-range graphics card with that one. And the one in front of Ruud is an RTX 4090, so basically as fast as you can get nowadays.
Yeah. If you have enough money, you can buy this one, and for people who are on a budget, they can
basically the one in front of Ruud,
or something in between, or even a little bit lower. But
yeah, the one in front of you is basically the fastest gaming system you can get nowadays.
At this moment, yes.
Yeah. We also have a giveaway today, so if you go to msi.com/2/insider, or if you're watching on YouTube or Twitch, you can also follow the direct link that our bot will put in the chat once every 5 minutes. That will lead you to Gleam. There you can perform certain actions. The more actions you perform, the bigger chance you will have to win. And also, if you're a returning visitor, make sure to claim your loyalty bonus for a slight edge in the giveaway as well. And throughout the stream, we will be giving away several Steam wallet codes, so make sure to participate. I already see a lot of messages in chat. Codehead's asking, is DDR5 overrated or actual upgrade? Well, today we're benching with both the DDR4 and DDR5 system. They are different CPUs, of course, but you can see a bit of the performance you can expect with the Core i5 in combination with DDR4 is what we're going to show you today. Yeah, if you have questions in between, drop them in chat. We cannot answer all of them, unfortunately, but we'll try to answer as many as possible. Also, if you have any test suggestions for later on, if you want us to fiddle around with certain BIOS settings that you're curious about. Of course, if it's about installing a whole new game that is currently not installed, it will be difficult. But if you're curious about a certain BIOS setting that we maybe can try out live on stream, then definitely drop it in chat later on. But first, for everyone who's not yet familiar with the 13th gen Intel Core, let's dive into the theory a bit about what CPUs Intel is also launching today, and about what they claim that they can do. So let's first take a look at the platform. So the 13th gen Intel Core processors, of course, launched together with the new Z790 chipset. So in our previous stream, we already went through all the ins and outs of those motherboards. Later on, I'll also show you our lineup again. Basically, 13th gen in terms of architecture is pretty similar to 12th gen, slightly upgraded in terms of performance, but the big change in 13th gen is the addition of way more E-cores. So Intel, since 12th gen Elder Lake, they started having a bit of a big little architecture. So you have the powerful performance cores, those are the P cores, and more energy efficient E cores, the efficiency cores. And in the previous generation, in terms of P cores, it is the same as you will see in this generation, but E cores doubled on all the SKUs that are launched. Later on, we'll show you an exact overview of the new SKUs, how fast they are, also the power requirements. Interesting topic, of course, with this generation. Already see some people talking about it in chat, which we'll also demonstrate today. So expect more E-cores in this generation. In terms of the integrated graphics for the non-F SKU, so you also have the F SKU that doesn't have integrated graphics, but the non-F one is actually the same as the previous generation, so no changes there. There's more PCI Express Gen 4 available from the chipset, so that's from a motherboard perspective the biggest difference when you compare Z790 to Z690. But of course it's also later now, so we also have newer features that we could put on our latest motherboard, so you will see some more differences. But from a chipset perspective, that's the biggest difference. The officially supported memory speeds for DDR5 are slightly higher. And yeah, that's basically the platform in a nutshell. Of course, still PCI Express Gen 5 was already there with Alder Lake, is again here with 13th Gen Raptor Lake. So these are the SKUs that Intel is launching today. So they're launching 2 i9s, 2 i7s, 2 i5s. Basically, the i9s are the same, apart from the fact that the F model doesn't have integrated graphics, whereas the regular K model does have it. These are all K models, meaning they also have an unlocked multiplier, and if you combine that with a Z series chipset, you can of course overclock with them. Yeah, of course this doesn't tell you that much to compare to the previous generation unless you see them side by side. So let's go to the next slide where you can see the new generation 13th gen compared to the 12th gen, the previous generation. These are all the K SKUs, so with integrated graphics, it's still the Intel Ultra HD Graphics 770. But the big difference, of course, in the processor cores. In terms of P cores, no difference. So the i9 will still give you 8 P cores, so does the i7, and the i5 still gives you 6 P cores. However, all E cores were doubled. So when you compare 12900K, had only 8 E cores. On the 13900K, that is 16 E cores. Basically, this generation i7 looks quite a lot like previous generation i9, so you get 8 P cores and 8 E cores. And for the i5, it was 6 P cores and 4 E cores. In the previous generation, goes to still 6 P cores, but now 8 E cores in the current generation. So you can see clock speeds are also slightly higher. You will also see that in the power consumption in certain situations, but also in specifically single-loaded workloads, single-threaded workloads, you will also see an increase in speed a little bit. Then power consumption. Ruud, that doesn't tell that much yet, the figures you see here, right?
These are the Intel recommended maximum power, turbo power.
So the official ones, basically, from Intel.
Yeah. So if you run it in our BIOS with what they call box cooler or Intel recommended settings, then you will get a 253 watts of package power. That's the limit.
Yeah. But on our motherboards, you can also go beyond this.
Yeah, default is unlimited, so
yeah.
At least for the Z boards. Yeah.
And actually, if you just let these processors go to their maximum automatically, they also go beyond this, right?
Yeah, definitely. And you can already see it in rendering. But
a bit of a spoiler alert, but yes,
yeah,
that will happen later in the stream.
Prime 95 or other AVX workloads, then the sky's the limit. Oh no, sorry, your cooler is the limit.
Sticky Yak 69 says Gamers Nexus already reviewed the 3900K and it drew over 300 watts. Yeah. It will also do that today in our system, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you can expect to see that later on.
We will try to lower that a little bit without losing performance. That's my goal.
On the very right, you also see the MSRP from Intel. Of course, this will differ a bit per region, what the price will be. Individual resellers can also ask a different price, but this is at least the set MSRP from Intel side. Then we also have the KF series. Basically, these are identical to the K SKUs, apart from the fact that these don't have integrated graphics. Price will also be slightly lower because of that. But it does mean that you always need a dedicated graphics card with these processors. And also, if you want to take advantage of things like Intel QuickSync, you do need an iGPU for that as well. So this is one of the slides that Intel released when they released their new 13th gen processors, and they're claiming to get 15% performance increased single-threaded and about 41% on multi-threaded. As you can see, the multi-threaded increase is a lot higher, and that of course has everything to do with the additional E-cores that you get on this platform. Single-threaded performance still an uplift, has to do with frequency, with the higher memory frequency as well. So we're going from 4800 to 5600 by default. Cache also a little bit increase. But yeah, multi-threaded is where there is the biggest gap when you compare the 12th gen to the 13th gen. Then looking at gaming performance, here you can already see that the changes are smaller than what you see with the multi-threaded performance, of course, because gaming very much leans on single-threaded performance. Of course, it does use multiple cores, but if you have a Core i9, there is no single game currently that will fully load all the cores in a Core i9. So current game engines are not yet optimized to fully utilize what today's processors have to offer. So this is really where the single core performance and also the performance of those E-cores comes in. And it should be slightly faster compared to the 12th gen. Later we'll also show you more details about this. But expect, depending on the title, a slight increase. There are also titles that don't benefit at all from it, so then you won't see a difference with 12th gen. But overall, slight increase in gaming performance, bigger increase in multi-threaded performance. Another big topic for Intel was efficiency. Of course, having more E-cores also means that in multi-threaded workloads, it is basically a more efficient CPU. And Ruud, you also did testing with this, right? So what are the results you were getting? Is it close to what you see in this slide?
Yeah, at least in the Cinebench, it was pretty close with I set like a power target of 88 watts, and that performed equally well as the 12900K before did with 240 watts. So yeah, that's a big jump in efficiency.
So for example, with rendering workloads, you can get the same performance at way lower power consumption.
I think that if you let it run loose or unlimited, the efficiency will drop off very quickly. The more power you put in.
Yeah, you can already see it a bit in this graph. Like the step from 65 watts to 253 watts is huge. In absolute power consumption, but you see that it will only give you 41% extra performance, even though the power draw increases way more than 41%.
Yeah, and if you do it unlimited, then it will shoot up to around 300 watts. And the additional performance you will get is very minimal, I would say.
So you really get diminishing returns at a certain point.
Yeah.
And
the further you go, it's like auto overclocking already. I mean, yeah, with overclocking, everybody knows the more power you put in, the last little bit of performance you can get out of it, but it's just a little bit more than before.
So maybe 10% more power will only give you 1 or 2% extra performance.
Yeah, if it were that much, everybody would be happy.
And this is, of course, a big topic, not only with this new Intel launch, but also a couple of weeks ago AMD did their launch as well. You also see there that they're like well beyond their ideal efficiency sweet spot, basically.
Yeah, at that time we did I recommended like a 170 watts package limit, and that kind of topic is now also the case, because if you run it unlimited, the cooling will be the limitation, and how to make it more efficient with the same performance. That's basically what you're going to try to do. Lower the power, same performance. That's
so basically
that's the new overclocking, really.
Yeah, so it does give you a lot of room to fiddle around with settings, and
that's for sure.
by barely losing any performance, you can get your power consumption down quite a lot.
Yeah, you could even win performance if your cooler is not really just on the limit. Then you can just lower the voltage a little bit, not run into stability problems, and still have even better performance because you're not running into the thermal throttling.
So it's definitely interesting to fine-tune a bit with your CPU.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And this is an open test bench, so for the CPU cooler, that's an ideal situation. But if you put it into a case, then overheating will be even more an issue.
Yeah. Codet's asking, does PSU need to be 1000 watt now? It depends, of course, on which exact model you get. The Core i9 is more power hungry than the Core i5, for example. It also very much depends on what graphics card you're combining it with. So the system we're running today in front of Ruud, the Core i9 system, is actually combined with an RTX 4090. And there the power consumption is, of course, relatively high. So in that system, I think we're using the 1300 watt power supply, right?
Yeah.
The MEG AI 1300P PCIe 5.
That's the one with the PCI Express 5 connector,
with the new
power
connector.
So,
but actually the second system, based on the Core i5 13600K and the RX 6650 XT graphics card, I think we're only running like a 550 watt power supply on that one.
Yeah, that's the more cost-effective one. So and it doesn't reach that 550 watt limit, at least not during gaming.
No, indeed. So it depends very much on which exact CPU are you talking about in the 13th gen, but also which graphics card will you combine it with? Because of course the graphics card is the other big power-hungry component within your computer.
I don't think we can reach 1300 on this one either. At least I haven't tried, but yeah, I think cooling-wise we will have a problem.
Mr. Mastodux is saying, I would like to see how 13th gen does versus 12th gen on the same clocks. We don't have a 12th gen here, unfortunately, but you've done a lot of testing. How would you say that relates to each other if you would clock them identically?
I haven't clocked them identically, so, but it's probably going to be a few percent. I think most of the performance gain in the 13th gen is the clock speed. So basically the frequency has been increased a lot.
It's not really like it's a complete new architecture that is completely different from the previous one, like we, for example, see with AMD now.
No, but still the jump in performance and the jump in frequency is quite big. So they did a very good job of optimizing.
But if you would clock them down to where a 12th gen would be, then you won't see tremendous increases in performance.
I think the performance will be very close, but the power draw will be a lot less.
So in terms of efficiency,
still okay.
Let's maybe compare those 13th gen and 12th gen side by side a bit. So we already talked about the core count. That's of course where the big difference is. There's also a slight increase in the cache size. So the level 3 cache was up to 30 megabytes in the 12th gen. It's now up to 36 in the 13th gen. The memory support went up from DDR5 4800 to DDR5 5600. Of course, this is the officially supported memory frequency, and you can, of course, run higher memory frequencies if you're running a B or a Z series chipset. So today, for example, on the system in front of Ruud, we're running DDR5 6000. I believe it's CL36 memory.
Yeah, 36.
From Corsair. Corsair Vengeance Kit. So you can definitely go beyond that 5600 megahertz as well. But the official support from Intel has increased a bit compared to the 12th generation. On the chipset, you will see quite a lot more PCI Express Gen 4 lanes. So if you want to run a lot of very fast storage, if you want to have several Gen 4 SSDs, that's where Z790 will mostly benefit compared to the Z690 chipset. And the USB 20 gigabit per second, you have one port more available. But that's not, it doesn't mean that you always have 5 ports available on any Z790 motherboard, because the feature set really depends on the exact motherboard. Then a very interesting thing for Intel is that you can actually combine 600 series chipset with a 13th gen processor, but also a 700 series chipset with a 12th gen processor. So you can mix and match basically in between the 12th generation and the 600 series chipsets and the 13th generation and the 700 series chipset. So this also means that you can, without any issues, run a 13th gen on a Z690 motherboard and still use, for example, the overclocking features on that Z690 motherboard. So if you're not interested, for example, in all those PCI Express Gen 4 lanes, and if the newer features of a Z790 motherboard are not necessary for you, then you can perfectly combine these new processors with a 600 series chipset to save some money. Also the other way around. Also the other way around, if you already have, for example, a 12th gen Core i9 and it's not useful for you to upgrade yet, but you do want a certain new feature that is available on the 700 series motherboard, then you can also upgrade to the 700 series while keeping your CPU. So I think that's a very nice thing to have. And of course, you also do have the freedom. There's still dual memory controllers in the 13th gen Intel, meaning you can still combine it with DDR4 as well. You can also put a 13th gen even on a B660 DDR4 motherboard, and that will make your whole platform quite a lot cheaper than when you would go Z790 DDR5. So it really depends on where your preferences are and what is necessary to you, but you can cost down quite a bit for yourself using this platform. Louis is asking, still no price for the new motherboards? Yes, they're actually available as of now, so you can actually check the price with your local reseller. They should already be listed online, so you should be able to find prices by now. Ridley says, first time for Intel using a platform twice. No, they have also done this in the past. For example, with Comet Lake and Rocket Lake, you could also do this. So those were the LGA 1200 motherboards. You could also run an 11 gen on a 400 series chipset, for example. So it's not the first time for Intel that they're doing this, but it's not like what AMD, for example, did with AM4. That platform continued for way longer than what we see with Intel usually. Drenix saying, what are the thermals? More about that later. We'll do some demonstrations, also show you the temperatures in relation to the power draw and the cooler that we're using. Coda says you can run both DDR5 or DDR4. Yes, you can. Oh, but of course, you have to get a specific DDR4 motherboard or specific DDR5 motherboard. We don't have any combination motherboards. Let's maybe take a look at those motherboards. So this is our Z790 lineup. In our MEG series, that's our enthusiast segment, we have the Godlike and the Ace. Those are always with DDR5, of course, because they're extremely high-end motherboards. MPG series, our performance series, we have Carbon, Edge, then we have the Edge also in DDR4, and we have the Mini ITX Edge. That's a DDR5 board. With the MAG series, our Arsenal series, we have Tomahawk in both DDR4 and DDR5. And then in our Pro series, we have a whole lot of motherboards. But basically, you can divide them in Dash A and Dash P. The Dash A is always with Wi-Fi, but it comes available DDR4, DDR5. The Dash P, you can also get it without Wi-Fi, with Wi-Fi, DDR5, DDR4. So you get 4 options in total for that motherboard. Quick overview of the biggest upgrades when you compare generation to generation. So Z790 motherboards compared to Z690 motherboards. On Godlike, for example, you see that the VRM is stronger. We went from 20 phases, 105 amps to 26 specifically for the CPU. 105 amp smart power stages. But also if you, for example, compare the Pro Z690-A to the Pro Z790-A, you also see that you will get 1680 amp smart power stages in opposed to 1455 amp Dr. Moss. So that's quite a big step up in this new generation. In our previous generation, the DDR5 models already had Intel Wi-Fi 6E. DDR4 models still had Intel Wi-Fi 6. In this generation, all motherboards that have Wi-Fi have Intel Wi-Fi 6E. Storage, up to 6 M.2 slots. In the previous generation, up to 7 in this generation. And then we have some other upgrades that we made that are not specifically tied to the chipset, but that we introduced in this generation. So for example, power delivery on your front USB Type-C. We're also introducing the ARGB, so the addressable RGB Gen 2 header for more individual LED control with this new generation. Magnetic and screwless M.2 shield frozzer. So no more screws and cables on certain models, certain M.2 slots to make the installation process easier as well. Let's maybe quickly go through all these boards separately. So the Z790-P model, so DDR4, DDR5 and Wi-Fi, non-Wi-Fi, but all of them come with extended heatsink, 14 times 55 amp Dr. Moss, Gen 5 on the primary times 16 slot, M.2 shield frozzer, and both 2.5 gigabit LAN and for the Wi-Fi models, Intel Wi-Fi 6E, as well as Lightning USB 20G. Then the Dash A, quite a big bump up in terms of VRM, so 16 smart power stages specifically for the CPU, all of them are 80 amps. Another feature that you will see here is that you will get more M.2 slots, more M.2 shield frozzer, also has the extended heatsink design, and this one, for example, comes with the integrated I.O. shield. In the MAG series, we have the Tomahawk in DDR4, DDR5, even stronger VRM, 16 times 90 amp smart power stages. So this is already a very high-end VRM. Like if you would compare this a couple of generations back, this VRM is way more powerful than the highest end motherboards only a couple of generations back. Also comes, of course, with Lightning Gen 5 times 16 slot, even more M.2 shield frozzer, integrated I.O. shield, 2.5 gigabit LAN and Wi-Fi 6E, and USB 20G, of course. Then in our MPG series, we have the Edge. So this is the ATX model, comes available in both DDR4 and DDR5, has 1690 amp smart power stages, Lightning Gen 5 on the times 16 slot, screwless M.2 shield frozzer, meaning you can take the primary M.2 shield frozzer off without using a screwdriver, and because of the easy M.2 clip underneath, you can also install your SSD itself without any screws, so it makes the installation process really easy. This board also comes with 2.5 gigabit LAN and Intel Wi-Fi 6E, as well as USB 20G. Then, of course, my personal favorite, Mini ITX. So this is the MPG Z790i Edge Wi-Fi. This is a DDR5 board specifically, so there's no DDR4 version of this one. It comes with frozzer heatsink. There is a small fan in there, but it supports zero frozzer technology, so the fan will only spin if it actually needs to, otherwise it will run passive. It has 10 105 amp smart power stages, so still, even though it's a very small motherboard, this is a very strong VRM that can still easily run a Core i9, for example. The challenge, however, will be that if you're running a Core i9 in a Mini ITX case, you will have to do some optimization in terms of power consumption, because cooling a Core i9 at maximum performance is basically impossible in a very small case. It also comes with the Lightning Gen 5 PCI Express times 16 slot. It has 3 M.2 slots, so 2 are stacked on top of each other, and there is a third one behind the motherboard. It has both 2.5 gigabit LAN and Intel Wi-Fi 6E, and it has USB 20G both on the I.O. itself, but also on the front Type-C header. Of course, your case also needs to support it in order to utilize this, but it has 2 times USB 20G available. Then we have the MPG Z790 Carbon Wi-Fi, and this is actually the board that we're using today. This is in front of Ruud.
This one?
Yeah, right there. By the way, the Tomahawk DDR4 is the other board that we're using. It's on the second test bench running with the Core i5. The Carbon has extended heatsink design with a heat pipe in there. It has 19 105 amp smart power stages specifically for the CPU. Lightning USB on both the PCI Express times 16 slot and on M.2. Also offers the screwless M.2 shield frozzer, 2.5 gigabit LAN and Intel Wi-Fi 6E, and this model also offers USB 20G on both the front and the rear. Then in our enthusiast segment, the first model is the ACE, the MEG Z790 ACE. So this has a stacked fin array VRM cooling, so basically it has all the little fins for bigger surface area, better heat dissipation. It also has a heat pipe. It has a very nice backplate as well. It has 24 105 amp smart power stages, Lightning Gen 5, so PCI Express Gen 5 slots, both the PCI Express slot itself and on M.2. Screwless M.2 shield frozzer with a magnetic function for the RGB lighting, so you don't have to separately connect any cables there. It has dual 2.5 gigabit LAN, so you also have 2 ports on the rear I.O., as well as Intel Wi-Fi 6E. This board also offers Thunderbolt 4 connectivity with DisplayPort in, so you can actually link your graphics card to your motherboard and get both the power and the display signal through a single USB Type-C cable to the monitor. And this board also offers power delivery over one of the front USB Type-C. So it has 2 front Type-Cs, and one of them can do power delivery. You do need to connect the separate 6-pin connector, but then you can power up to 60 watts over your front USB Type-C. Of course, this is also something that your case has to support. So our new Prospect case can, for example, do this. And you can use this to maybe charge a notebook or anything like that through your front USB Type-C on your PC. And then, of course, the biggest motherboard of them all. Like the Ace, this is also an extended ATX motherboard, but it's even slightly bigger. It has wavy fin heatsink with cross heat pipes, meaning it actually has 2 heat pipes in there. It has 26 105 amp smart power stages for the CPU. Lightning Gen 5, PCI Express Gen 5 on both the x16 and the M.2. Screwless M.2 shield frozzer with the magnetic connection for the RGB. It has both 10 gigabit LAN and 2.5 gigabit LAN. As well as Intel Wi-Fi 6E. By the way, the 10 gigabit LAN controller here is a Marvel controller. It offers Thunderbolt 4 connectivity, and it comes with the M-Vision dashboard out of the box. That's a nice external LED touchscreen that you can use to control a lot of settings, but also to monitor a lot of settings like temperatures, fan speeds. You can reboot it when you're updating your BIOS. You can see the status in there. You can put your own animations in there, so a lot of nice stuff to do there. So it comes included in the box with Godlike. So those are the boards available in the Z790 lineup. This was just a quick recap. If you want to see more details, we actually had a live stream about this before where we went through all the motherboards and also the individual features. But today we're going to focus more on performance. So Ruud, you actually have some nice benchmarks prepared. But before we're going to do that, maybe let's draw our first winner.
Okay.
So if you haven't participated yet in the giveaway, go to msi.com/2/insider. If you're watching on YouTube or Twitch, you can also follow the direct link to Gleam that our bot will put in the chat once every 5 minutes. And our first winner for today for one of the Steam wallet codes is... The honor is all yours, Ruud. Can you read it? Should I make it bigger?
Yeah, that's okay. Hypermodel.
Congratulations, Hypermodel. So keep an eye out to your mailbox, then we'll email the Steam wallet code to you in the coming days with some instructions on how to redeem it. And if you haven't participated yet, please do so, because we'll have several drawings throughout the stream. So, Ruud, time for benchmarks.
Yeah, let's do some benchmarking and some power, some cooling, some performance. Let's do the high-end one first, or?
Yeah, let's go to your Core i9 system. So in the bottom graph, you can see all the specs of this system.
Yeah,
so
I'll also open up the HW Info 64, then you'll see most of the specs I'm running. Let me center that. The GPU, there's also an integrated graphics
Cheers,
active.
everyone.
But it's a 13900K CPU, so that's the top model. Running on a Z790 Carbon Wi-Fi motherboard. And the memory is Corsair DDR5 6000 with castle latency 36 and an RTX 4090 Supreme X. Hey, it didn't detect the Supreme X one. Maybe the database not updated yet for the 4090s.
Still a very new card, of course.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So it cannot detect the bias maybe yet.
And you're also running a Gen 4 SSD, I see.
Yeah, that's an MSI M480. 1 terabyte. That's already on the market for some time, but
Skeets is asking YouTube chat, 1300 watt PSU. Yes, this system is running the MEG AI 1300P PCIe 5 power supply.
The reason for it is not that I need 1300 watts for this system, but the 4090 comes with the 12+4 pin power connector, and this was the only power supply that had the native ATX 3.0 or PCI Express 5.
At least the only one that we had here.
Yeah, the 12 VHPWR connector, or whatever the name is. It's it's this one, this cable.
Yeah. So also you're powering the 4090 off a single power cable.
What's that?
So you're also powering the graphics card off a single power cable now. So in the previous generation, you had like a whole row of power connectors.
The card comes with an adapter, so you can do 4 8-pins into a 12. Adapter into a 12+4 pin connector.
So that is if you're using an older power supply, that you can still use the card.
Yeah, you can perfectly fine use it. With the benchmarking we will do today, with the normal gaming stuff and with the rendering stuff, I don't expect any power over 700 watts, but that's still a lot. That's still, but the card alone, the graphics card alone, can do 450. So, or even in this configuration, it can do 480. At least that's the power limit. the default power limit. But I don't think we're going to see that. Maybe you need different games to see the 480, or maybe slight spikes up to 480, because most games run between 400 and 450 watts, so the power limit is set quite extremely in this generation. So again, for the graphics cards, it's also already mega overclocked, or up to its maximum frequency, maximum power, and yeah, that will make it will draw a lot of power from the wall and might not be in its best efficiency window, I would say. And the same goes with the CPUs. We saw that already with the Ryzen 7950X, and with the 13900K, that's actually the same. So also, because we're running unlimited power limits in the BIOS, the default power limit in the BIOS is set to unlimited, or 4095 watts. Well, I don't think we're going to reach that part today, but that's basically unlimited. If we run the traditional Cinebench benchmark, the power will also shoot up quite high, higher than the default values that Intel is communicating. So the 253 watts, that's not going to cut it. So we're at 296 peak, and then it reaches 100 degrees quite fast, and then it will lower the clocks a little bit. So normally it would be 5486, and now sometimes it's dropping like 100 megahertz. Actually, it should show you all the clocks, all the peak clocks at least. And sometimes one is dropping to 100 megahertz lower, so instead of 5.5 it will do 5.4 gigahertz. It will lose a little bit of performance because of the HW info running, but also because it's reaching its maximum temperature of 100 degrees centigrade.
So for example, on the AMD 7000 series, we saw basically a temperature threshold of 95 degrees.
Yeah.
So that's where it started thermal throttling.
Yeah. That's
for
set
Intel,
up in
this
the
is
BIOS,
100 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes in notebooks you have the BIOS set up also for 95 degrees, so it will hover around 95, sometimes hitting 96, but yeah, it tries to keep it below 95. For desktop CPUs, most of the time it's 100. So if it's reaching 100, then you'll probably see little dips in performance or clock speeds if you run a monitoring program. If you don't run a monitoring program and you can keep it cool, it will reach about 40.3 to 40.7 thousand points in Cinebench 23.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, yeah.
And that has to do a lot also with those additional E-cores, because it essentially has 8 more cores than a 12900K, for example.
Yeah, but you have to consider that the 12900K, okay, it did a little bit less power, of course, or maybe quite much lower power, but it did 27,000 points. So the performance gap is also quite big. So yeah, efficiency-wise, it's not that bad because it just improves performance a lot.
See in chat, JPSH Racer Gaming says, did we not just go to PCI Express 4.0 and now a jump to PCI Express Gen 5? Well, actually, Intel has been on PCI Express 4.0 for a very short time, because already with Elder Lake, so the 12th gen, they already jumped to PCI Express Gen 5. So in Comet Lake, Intel was still at PCI Express 3.0, so that's the 10th generation Intel Core. Then with Rocket Lake, the 11th generation Intel Core, they jumped to PCI Express 4.0, and then with Elder Lake already, so the 12th gen, they already made the jump to PCI Express 5.0. Of course, that doesn't mean that everything is now PCI Express Gen 5. But yeah, that's when they first introduced it. So they have it again on Raptor Lake. AMD we saw a little bit longer on PCI Express Gen 4. I think they introduced it back in July 2019, if I'm not mistaken, when they introduced their 3000 series AMD Ryzen processors and their 500 series, so the X570 chipset. That's when AMD introduced PCI Express 4.0, and now, of course, a couple of weeks ago, when they launched AM5 with X670 and B650, they also introduced PCI Express Gen 5 on their latest platform. Skeets is asking, does the PSU have only one of those connections? Can we see the PSU specs? I don't have the specs here on hand, but I think you mean the 12 VH, so the 12 volt, the 12 plus 4-pin power connector. And yes, it has one of them, but over a single connector, you can go up to 600 watts on that model.
Yeah.
So
and
still
it has
fine.
additionally also you can connect 2 8-pins for the CPU, for the motherboard, and I think 3 or 4, no, I think 4 8-pins for the graphics card as well. So it has plenty of connections.
Yeah, maybe one doesn't sound like much, but one of those new connectors is just as powerful as 4 regular 6 plus 2-pin power connectors that we saw on previous generations.
Yeah.
So it is actually an extremely powerful connector. It's just a single cable, but it can still provide 600 watts, whereas a 6 plus 2 pin can only do up to 150 watts. So that's a big, big difference.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna start up the Intel Extreme Tuning Utility, or XTU.
Rampage is asking for a CSGO test. Later on in the stream, we will have a CSGO test.
Yeah, you saw the icon already. Very good. Because of our scaling, we set scaling to 150% on Full HD resolution, so you will only see a little bit of the settings at once. So the new XTU doesn't seem to be scaling it down anymore. So let's go to the important stuff. Well, you can see ICC max, how much current the CPU can pull. It's also set to unlimited, and also the turbo boost the short power, and the boost power max, that's the long-term power, that's, or after 56 seconds. That's the settings that Intel recommends to 253. Let's try that one. And I think it's chosen quite well, because so this should be the Intel recommended power draw. Let's run the Cinebench again and see what we get. Of course, the package power shouldn't come as a surprise that it will reach around 253. Oh, sorry. So now it's capping at 253 watts. You can also see that the clock speeds are no longer in the 5.5 range, but in the 5.2, 5.3 gigahertz range. But it doesn't lose that much performance. At least the performance deficit is not that high compared to the power loss, or the power improvement, I can say. So you only lose a little bit. That's the efficiency part. So unlimited, it will just go beyond the efficiency part, and you can even lower it further. But the lower you get, the less performance you'll get, of course. I think around 220 watts, I think it's a nice balance for this CPU if you want to save electricity. But it only comes into effect when the CPU is actually fully loaded. So in a 3D rendering, the CPU will be fully loaded. All cores are working 100%. Also, stress test will give 100%. The core usage here is all 100%. It was just a little bit too late. But performance-wise, you will go to around 36.8 thousand points, coming from 40. That's not that big a difference, I would say.
You also see that in your, when you had it to unlimited, you saw that it reached the 100 degrees Celsius thermal threshold. Now you're not reaching that anymore.
Yeah, this was the 253 watts. I must say the package power doesn't show on every board the same way. So there's quite some big differences between boards. So you can't really 100% compare it. So we are looking into that, why that is. But for 220 watts, the temperatures will go into the 82. So that's, and the last part is 84. That's a lot different than the 100 degrees we saw earlier. But that's only with like a 3D rendering workload. I also tested like video encoding with H.265 and also did 7-zip compressions. But usually, even with unlimited power settings, that will hover around 150 watts. So from the 300 watts it can do, it only consumes half of it. So those workloads, being compression, video encoding, photos, audio, those workloads will never get near the maximum power because it doesn't stretch the CPU with all those threads. So it doesn't make use of the CPU fully. So half of it will be in lower power states.
Arizon is asking, can you test Intel's claim of 65 watts being as good as 12900K?
So Intel claims if we do 65 watts, I hope I can go that low. Yeah, it can. 65, exactly right. Okay. It should do about 27,000 points. That was the score of the 12900K. So let's see what it does.
Sticky X asking, how come you're using Windows 10? I think you're using Windows 11, right?
This is Windows 11, but it's 21H2, not 22H2. There were some issues with the earlier drivers from NVIDIA on the 22H2. So, and we did also the testing for the AMD one on the 21H2. So we basically want to keep it the same.
I see a question from Godwin in the chat. How good is 13 Gen series for virtualization?
Well, the claims of Intel that it's with 65 watts is not really entirely true. So I only get like 23,000 points instead of 27,000 points. So I think it should be more like the 88 I was talking about.
And it's also something that can depend on the exact test, right?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm not sure if the Intel claim was based on Cinebench, for example.
That's true, yeah. Let's try 89.
Sticky Ox says Cinebench shows Windows 10. Yeah, I think it's Cinebench is just wrong there.
Basically, it's Windows 10.22,000.1098, if I'm correct. So the build number is, yeah. Also, yeah, Cinebench says Windows 10, yeah.
But
maybe
yeah,
Cinebench needs updating. Yeah. Maybe there's already a new version of Cinebench, but usually there's not that much updates on Cinebench, so yeah.
Corsair Sloop is asking, can you go 6 gigahertz all core?
No, my cooler cannot handle that. I think there's no water cooling that can handle that.
So we're already using like a very high-end all-in-one liquid cooler. So we're using the Core Liquid S360 here. So 360 millimeter, really high-end liquid cooler. But then already you cannot go that far.
Yeah, but it's still impressive that you can do like the same performance as a 12900K with 240 watts. You can do that with 89 watts now in the same test, right? That's a big jump in efficiency, I would say. Yeah.
And that's of course because of all those E-cores now, 16 of them in this CPU.
If you look at the P-core frequency, it had, with the 89 watts, it could do 3.6 gigahertz, and then it matches, I'm not sure what the 12900K was doing in P-core, all-core workloads, but it's probably around 4.7 or something. So yeah, efficiency-wise, yeah, it has increased quite a bit. And of course the E-cores will help out, especially if you decrease the power, then the efficiency cores will probably be more important than the P-cores. But this is all lowering power, but also lowering performance. So maybe we can go another step, and we need to go into the BIOS to do so. And we keep the same performance, or maybe even a little bit higher, and lower the power. That's also possible. One note though, for the people who want to use the Intel Extreme Tuning utility, the new version has restored tuning after reboot enabled by default. That's this little box here. So if you set some settings and then restart, those settings will be applied the next time you reboot. I was not aware of that, so that's why I'm telling you. The previous versions of XTU didn't do that by default, so if you don't want that from happening, just uncheck that box.
So a question in chat from Louis on YouTube chat: is there a motherboard with a flash button in order to flash the BIOS without CPU installed? Because I want to use 12 gen motherboard with 13 gen CPU. I need this feature. Actually, in our Z790 boards, all of them apart from the Mini ITX have the flash BIOS button.
Okay.
But also in our previous generation already, a lot of those boards had a flash BIOS button.
Okay, I want to go into the BIOS, so I need to unplug the display port.
Otherwise, he will see it on the screen, but
exactly.
you cannot see it through the capture.
Hopefully it works.
Shivam is asking, will you do gaming benchmarks? Yes, for sure.
We do.
Stickyyak is asking, did Intel kill the overclock insurance they used to do?
Insurance?
What do you mean with the insurance? And basically in overclocking, I would say there is not that much to gain this generation. There is a lot more to gain in optimizing your CPU.
Maybe with LN2 you can...
yeah, if you really do extreme cooling, but if you're not doing extreme cooling, don't expect too much from overclocking.
No, I think that the current hardware, and that goes for Intel, goes for AMD, and also
goes for NVIDIA
most graphics cards.
Yeah.
Let's say the most high-end ones, you cannot do much overclocking 24/7 anymore, because the turbos, the algorithms are that good to extract the most already, that it's hard to gain any extra performance, or very minor, and you'll probably need to add a lot of power and a lot of cooling as well. So maybe for the lower parts, there's still room. So maybe the i5 has some room left, but I think not that much either. The i5 also draws quite a bit of power, I must say.
Yeah, quite a lot more also than previous generation i5.
Yeah, it's also quite a bit up. So for adjusting CPU parts in the BIOS, you have a easy mode. That's the one you might see the first time you boot up, and there's also an advanced mode. You switch with the F7 button. Also, one little extra trick on this board is that you have a button on the back says Smart, and that you can choose a different function for it. So if you want to do Mystic Light on off, we can switch that with a button if you select it like this. And also the reset button, that's the button you connect with a cable to the front of your case, can also be retasked to a different function. I just want to show you. Back to the overclocking part. The CPU things that are interesting if you don't want to do manual overclocking are also in the overclocking part, and most specifically in the advanced CPU configuration part. The interesting part I'm going to show you today is the light load. At the moment it says it's in mode 9. So normally if you drop in a CPU, the BIOS will automatically select the default mode. I've noticed that it's different for the i9 than it is for the i5. The i5 will go to mode 12 by default. The i9 goes to mode 9 by default. Basically you have choices here, And what it does, it seems to adjust the AC load line for telling the CPU, or basically the VRM is telling the CPU, I'm a very good or a less good VRM, and it changes what you can call as like the series resistor in front of the CPU. So if you're having a very good VRM on your motherboard, it will tell you, okay, I'm a mode 1. So the resistance is very low and all the power will go to the CPU, and the droop will also be very less. That's what the VRM is telling the CPU, so the CPU will adjust its VID, so how it requests how much voltage it gets to the BIOS and also to the VRM. But the lower you go, the less voltage the CPU will get, so it will, at one point it will get unstable for sure. So
so this is just a bit of trial and error to see what
exactly.
it can do.
So with the mode 7 I can go I can do everything. It's quite stable. It's very stable. I've run it overnight even, no problem. With the mode 6 it's also quite stable for some time, but I haven't tested that one like longer. When I go mode 5, it's not that stable. So that's the threshold here. So around mode 6 or mode 7 is fine. So you can play around with this and test it for yourself. Usually it won't give you any problems or risks, because the power is going to lower, not increase. So with overclocking, usually the power increases and the voltages increase, which makes it dangerous. This is not dangerous at all and very easy to implement. So let's go with mode 6. I think that will show the difference quite a bit.
While you're booting again, I see some questions in chat. VRK says, I'm so confused right now, which processor should I get, 13th or 12th gen? I think it very much depends on how much do you care about multi-threaded workloads, because that's where you see a big increase with 13th gen. Single-threaded, you still have a little bit of an increase, but by no means as much as you will see in multi-threaded.
Yeah. I think the most important question is always, what are you going to do with the system? Yeah. So if 3D rendering is one of your workloads, then
hands
the
down
better
13th
CPU
gen.
will probably be a good investment. But if gaming is your thing, then I wouldn't go with i9. I wouldn't go with Ryzen 9 either. I think those CPUs are too expensive and not making that much of a difference.
I also see some discussion about overclocking. NRT says on Twitch chat, both AMD and Intel have killed off overclocking pretty much. Well, basically, and I also saw the reply in chat already, they're basically already getting the maximum out of a CPU for you. So basically they're overclocking it out of the box to what it can do. That's also why the efficiency is not in its sweet spot anymore. So yeah, indeed, if you go by the default settings, there is not much additional, especially if you run it in unlimited power, then there is not much you can still get out of it unless you're going to use extreme cooling like LN2 or something. Otherwise, yeah, there is way more to gain in optimizing the other way to make it more efficient. You will not lose that much performance, and you can get your CPU way more efficient. So indeed, the overclocking as we used to know it in the past, that is basically slowly disappearing. Not only for CPUs, but we can also see that, for example, the RTX 4090 that is on this system, there is also not much headroom in it anymore. It's already being pushed to its maximum out of the box, basically.
The signal's not back yet.
Michael says, for gaming, i7 12th gen or i5 13th gen? With sales, those are comparable in price. I would personally lean towards i5 13th gen for gaming because of the slightly higher single core performance. You do have fewer P cores, so performance cores, but on the other hand, you get the same number of E cores with it, so it's not very far behind in terms of... Do I say that correctly, by the way? The i5 now has 6 and 8. No, it has more E-core. So I think in multi-threaded it might even be faster as well. Do you know, dude? The i5
Not sure. Yeah.
3600K and the i7 12700K.
I think they will pretty
be
close
close,
in
I think.
performance. Yeah. I think I would go with the one that's cheapest.
Yeah, but if they're the same in price, I would lean towards 13th gen personally.
I have a problem. Well, my system has a problem. I don't have a problem. But,
Houston, we have a problem?
no, this is a problem I saw in testing as well. So it actually has nothing to do with the undervolting. Actually, we're not undervolting that much. But it's a problem of the 4090 on this board. And more people are having issues with restarts and also black screens, but that's what I'm experiencing now. And that has something to do with the new driver as well, but also with this motherboard. I didn't see it on all Z790 motherboards.
Because you also said some people are also experiencing this problem with the same driver and 3000 series graphics card, right?
Yeah. There's a whole thread on
but if you have
forum.
if you have like a 30 series graphics card, you can revert to the previous driver, but on 40 series graphics card, you don't have a previous driver yet because it's too new.
I'm regretting that I'm using this board by now, because the other board didn't have that problem. But it wasn't a nice one like this one. This one has LEDs and stuff, right?
And we have to hope for an NVIDIA driver update to solve this, right?
And our headquarters also aware of this issue and investigating. They have a BIOS update ready, or at least a test BIOS. And they asked me, do you want to try it? But it was just like 10 minutes before live stream going live. So I thought, better not. It's running now. But then we go live and we still have issues. So
now we're back.
You're back. Oh, now I'm also back. Yeah, for a little while. Well, if you're experiencing problems like this, it might help. There's a few workarounds that can be done. One is disable the integrated graphics. Sometimes that works to get into the desktop longer. Another thing is disable the hardware accelerated GPU scheduling in Windows, if you have enough time to do so. So you first need to go to the desktop and click display settings real quick. I'm trying to get into the BIOS, but
Charlie Holmes says on YouTube, okay, for every minute it goes down, Ruud owes Mike a Coke.
That will be a lot of Cokes.
Nice.
But now I don't see the BIOS either. Not sure why though. Maybe it's the capture card? Let me unplug the capture card for a minute.
Because you're back live again on your system.
You can watch maybe the other system. I didn't have problems on the Tomahawk, but
yeah, this one is still running. This is the i5 system.
Yeah, that one's still running. I'm getting a picture here now. I'm into the BIOS. Let me disable the integrated graphics. We're not going to use that anyway. Hopefully it will allow me to go into the desktop. I shouldn't have listened. I should have listened to our headquarters and say, okay, just flash the BIOS.
is saying, can they not send you a USB stick, or are you in a different building? That's actually our headquarters in Taiwan, and we're currently streaming from our European headquarters in the Netherlands. Yeah. So that's quite far away physically.
Now Windows says please wait and need to restart and blah blah, and the blue screen, repair options, recovery, blah blah.
JVidya is asking, do you advise DDR4 or DDR5 with a 13600K? It depends on what you want to do and how much that specific thing benefits from having faster memory. I would say, and it also depends, of course, on what, at the moment you're buying it, what the price difference is between DDR4 and DDR5. At the moment, for an i5, I would personally lean more towards DDR4. If you go higher, I would lean more towards DDR5. This is also why our second demonstration system with the i5 we're running today is using the Z790 Tomahawk Wi-Fi DDR4. On the other hand, if you want to do more future-proofing, basically, if you would now if you still have to buy DDR4 memory, if you would now do that and get a kit of DDR4, you basically already know that that is the end of the lifespan for your DDR4 memory. You will not take it with you to another system anymore, whereas DDR5 has more of a future in it, of course.
Okay, we can switch back to the other one.
We're back?
Yeah, we're back. One workaround for the problem I was having, and I don't know why it was triggered again. You can go to display settings, then go to graphics, then change default graphics settings, and here it says hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. So if you have that problem, try to disable this part. So there are a few tricks or a few workarounds. This is the one that worked for me, at least up till now. The other one is increase the power settings for your GPU, in this case the 4090. The power management mode you can change to prefer maximum performance. Not going to do that now, but I think it will be okay now. That sometimes also helps, and what I did was I disabled the integrated graphics, so it's gone now. So I disabled that part in the BIOS to get into the desktop again. So that sometimes happens. We're looking into that issue. Probably needs a BIOS update for this motherboard, as some boards have it and some boards don't have the problem. So
Green Lantern is asking in YouTube chat, I noticed the new Ace boards, the Intel has dual heat pipe and the AMD has one. Does that mean Intel gets hotter? Well, the thermal threshold of Intel is 5 degrees Celsius higher, so 100 degrees instead of 95 on AMD. And also the power consumption on Intel is generally a bit higher than on AMD.
yeah.
So yeah, from that perspective, you could say AMD is a bit more efficient than Intel. Intel is usually a little bit faster, AMD is a bit more efficient.
Yeah, the power draw we saw with this i9 was the peak was about 296 watts, and before it ran into the 100-degree thermal ceiling. So now it's about 266, and that's because of the light load mode 6 setting I use. It's not because I disabled the integrated graphics, because that will draw less than 1 watt if it's not used. And also the score is a little bit up now, 4.5, but that fluctuates a little bit depending on what you do. But the most interesting part is that it will not reach the 100 degrees anymore, so it will keep 4.5 all the way.
Because
So
it
no
doesn't
dips.
reach that thermal threshold there.
Exactly, so it doesn't touch the 100 degrees, then it doesn't throttle and doesn't lower the clocks. That's basically what happens here. So the power draw is less, quite a bit less. The other one was, I'm not sure, was probably settled between 285 and 290. And this one is 266, so that's quite a big difference. And the performance is higher or the same, depending on your cooling. So that's something where you can play around with. You can also play with the power limits. You don't have to use that in XTU. You can also set that in a BIOS if you want, no problem. But you can also play around with the XTU part. I will show you that the power limits haven't changed. Unexpected. Okay.
Ruud, I saw a question in chat. What would you recommend for gaming, Windows 10 or Windows 11?
I think for anything newer than Alder Lake, I would go with Windows 11 because Windows 10 is not optimized for the big and small core architecture.
So the PE core architecture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We haven't seen that much issues with Windows 10 and performance hits on the P and E cores, but yeah, we saw a Cinebench 15 was one of the exceptions that would really be awful performance on Alder Lake at least. I haven't tried Windows 10 on Raptor Lake at all, so.
Yeah, basically by now we're running Windows 11 by default on your system.
But we haven't upgraded to 22H2 version yet, so we're a little bit hesitant because people reported gaming performance hits, also dropped frame drops or frame rate drops. So yeah, that's something you don't want to see in live stream. Yeah, unfortunately, other issues can creep up in live streams as well.
Charlie Holmes is saying anti-cheat has compatibility issues with Windows 10. I know it had in the beginning, but does it still have those? I heard some of those stories in the early days of Windows 11, but I think most should be fixed by now.
With the games?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fixed. That's no problem.
Yeah.
The last one I remember having issues was Valhalla from the bigger titles.
Yeah.
But that was fixed as well. So, but I think it was fixed. Not really quickly, but it got fixed eventually. Yeah. It took some time, but yeah, I think all issues are gone now. But that was because of the Lenovo DRM something, digital right management thingy. Okay. Want to switch over to the i5 one, or?
Sounds good.
Because that was the CPU part. You can also run like a single-threaded Cinebench, but that takes quite a bit of time, and we can see the scores online in the reviews as well. So the MAG part, the i5, is a system with an i5 13600K. Here the integrated graphics is still enabled.
Actually, after we ran this one, I can also show the viewers the overview that you made with the testing you also did with the AMD 5000 series and Intel 12 Gen. Then you can see a little bit how they compare to each other in Cinebench, both single-threaded and multi-threaded. Yeah, and also there's a power meter. Also, we recorded the power during the Cinebench and see what the efficiency does between AMD, Intel, Intel 13 and 12 Gen. So this is a 13600K. It's still an engineering sample, so not sure if the performance is identical, but yeah, we have to wait and see. It's a Z790 Tomahawk Wi-Fi DDR4 motherboard with G.Skill memory, DDR4 3600 CL18. So these are like it's relatively affordable memory, you could say.
Yeah, I think that's one of the sweet spot memory timings and speeds around now. Yeah, and it's also 2 times 16 gigabytes, same as this one. So
and it's also what many people may already have in their current system. Also widely available because for AM4 this 3600 was basically the sweet spot in terms of performance. If you go higher, you wouldn't get much real performance out of it. Yeah, because of the Infinity Fabric. Yeah, exactly. That's not the case with AM5 anymore. It's different. RX 6650 XT, I think that's one of the best value for money cards at the moment. That's why we chose it. I think it's a nice fit with an i5. Maybe a non-K i5 would have been nicer, but then you probably also go with a B660 board or whatever. But we want to show off the Z790 today. And personally, I like the Tomahawk design. So basically, all the components in this system is really targeted at the good price-performance ratio. Yeah, exactly. So and it's also what most people will probably buy. Like there is, of course, the i9 is the flagship, but there's always more people buying i5 than i9. I think that the i9, I think that the i7, the 13 Gen, 13700K i7 is the old i9
12900K, and most people don't need that one either.
Yeah.
So the i5 would be the more sensible buy.
Especially for gaming systems.
Yeah, especially if you don't need the 3D rendering part or the stuff that really loads all the cores. Then just go with
you
the
don't
i5.
lose very much gaming performance with an i5 compared to an i9, like barely anything, and in certain titles nothing at all.
Yeah, but the i5 is quite a bit more power hungry than the 12 gen 12600K. So this time it's doing 200 watts, but the performance is there. So yeah. So with a 200 watts power draw in Cinebench, then temperatures go also up quite a bit, and this is a Core Liquid 240R, so it's a pretty mainstream water cooler, I would say, and it gets you 24,000 points in Cinebench, so that's not that far away from the 12900K.
On an i5, that's quite impressive.
On an i5, yeah. So yeah, in terms of performance for money, that's probably a good increase there. Not sure about the pricing though. Prices might settle also, yeah. So again, with this one, you can also lower the power a little bit, and I was amazed how much light load modes I could change with this one. Maybe we can show also the wall power. So I'll start a Cinebench. Can you switch to the detail cam?
Yes.
So this one is idle now, that's doing nothing. This one is doing about 310 watts. That's a very old power meter, by the way. And it's running Cinebench with the 202 watts. So this is quite stable. That's the good part about Cinebench, the performance and the power is very steady. Now it stopped, and then you see the power meter switch to 0 for a little bit. I think that's the power cycling thing. So it does 202 watts, and here you go with the 24,000 points. I think we can lower that even further. There's one thing you can also try, and I did that before. In the Intel Extreme Tuning Utility, XTU, there's also what they call speed optimizer. So it says, do you want to automatically overclock your processor? Yeah, why not? I closed Cinebench, that was not necessary. And let's see what we get now. So now it goes up to 225 watts, so increasing, yeah, roughly 10%. Also the clocks are a bit up, from 5.1 to 5.2, sometimes 5.3. Wall power is up with 340 watts, give or take, 338, also saw 40. So 30 watts more there. That's what we see also in the HW info sensors page. Now you get 25,000 points, so already getting closer to the 12900K, but also power is getting close to the 12900K. So less cores need to work hard or need a lot of power to increase.
So for i5 you can still make it a bit faster, but of course you lose efficiency. So
yeah. So let me show you what you can do with. Oh, hang on. Did I set this one correctly? Yeah. Okay.
Eugene Teos asking, will we be benchmarking the 13700K? No, unfortunately, only the i5 and i9 at this point.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this 13600K is identical to the retail one, so I'm going to try and go into the BIOS. I need to disconnect the display port without disturbing the rest of it. One thing I forgot to show you on the 13900K system is the cooler selection part in the BIOS. Once you go into the BIOS the first time, then it will also pop up, but sometimes it doesn't, or if you already made settings, it won't bother you again. But here's the water cooler, the tower cooler, and the boxed cooler. Boxed cooler is a bit of a weird name, I would say, because
it's
the K CPUs don't have a boxed cooler.
Yeah.
So the name I already suggested to our BIOS team is better called Intel recommended settings. So you can see it's 181 watts. That's the recommended max turbo power for the 13600K.
And don't get confused by the water cooler 4096 watts. It will never draw that. It basically means that it's fully
but the
unlocked.
water cooler can also not dissipate that. So yeah. So here again we have the light load mode, and as you can see, the 13600K, the default mode is mode 12 here. So also means we can go more steps up, and I will show you how far you can go. But there's also the power limits here. So if you want to set manual power limits, that's also possible. You don't need to use XTU. And if you set it here, it will remain there for every reboot you do. So you don't depend on software. You just set it up in the BIOS and that's it. I think I showed it in previous live streams as well. Light load mode, that's the advanced mode. You can also set the AC load line and the DC load line, and that's in millivolts, or I think this is micro, no, not milli ohms, sorry, micro ohms I think is this at the moment. No, that's not true. The 110 means 1.1 milli ohms. So I have no idea what the name is exactly. There's some calculation going. Easier way, don't touch that and just go with the presets. So this is the presets that our overclock team already fine-tuned for you. The good part about this CPU and this motherboard is you can go up to mode 1. So I've tested everything. So I started at mode 12, then I go to mode 9, mode 7, 5, 3, 1. Also works. And it lowers the power considerably. I pressed F10 and save and exit.
Frankie says, hey guys, does the new 13th series CPU come with a heatsink? I think you mean the box cooler. No, so the CPUs that were launched now are all K SKUs, and they don't come with a box cooler anymore. So they're the unlocked ones, the overclockable ones. Also, I would not recommend to be using this with the coolers that Intel would usually box other models with. These CPUs, so the i5 13600K, i7 13700K, and i9 3900K. Like the i5, you would be fine with like a bigger tower air cooler, or like a 240mm radiator. Maybe if you optimize it, you could also do with a 120mm radiator, for example.
I think that's already pushing it, because the default
that would require optimization.
Watts is quite a big power load.
But if you would do some optimization and set certain power limits, then you would be able to do it.
I hope I can show you now that if you use these kind of settings, or if your configuration is able to drop the power that much without losing performance, then then you could get a cheaper cooling, or a smaller cooling, or less noise on your system. I think it's all benefits there.
But yeah, i7 and i9 in this generation basically go 280mm, or preferably even 360mm.
Yeah.
All-in-one liquid coolers.
And also make sure there's airflow in your case, because if you go 300 watts on a CPU, that's massive.
Yeah.
So we just dropped 50 watts on a 200 watt CPU. That's a lot.
Leo is asking, when will the new motherboards be released? I tried to buy, but not available.
The wall is going from 310 to 250, so losing 60 watts there.
Well, no, well, they should pop up anytime soon. They also get released officially today.
Which ones?
The Z790 motherboards.
Ah, okay, okay. Is there already some news about the non-case or?
No.
No, no, okay. So, actually we got more performance. Is that XTU still active? No, it's not. Oh, we got more performance. Probably because it's cooler.
Coco Bongo says on Twitch chat, I would use 70 to 90 watts TDP for Green World, also Pocket. Yeah, with the current energy prices, it can indeed be interesting to optimize your system a bit, especially if you use your system a lot.
Yeah,
Flexi is
I think for 70 to 90 watts, you'll probably go into the non-case or AMD.
Flexi is saying, are you going to show off the Z790 Godlike motherboard in this live stream? We actually have already shown that one when Intel released their 13th gen processors in Z790, so that's a couple of weeks ago. We've already shown our boards then, but at that moment we couldn't show you 13th gen performance yet. So that's why we have a separate live stream for benchmarking right now. But we actually had a live stream before where we've shown all the different models in detail. So definitely check that out. We've also shown the Godlike there.
By the way, if you go from 200 watts to 150-ish watts, that means you also can go to instead of a beefy tower cooler, you go into a mainstream tower cooler. I think most tower coolers that are not the lowest end ones.
But if you get like a 120 millimeter fan on it, you should usually be fine.
Exactly, yeah. So like the Cooler Master Evo 212 or something, that's one that's been around for ages, and that's good for 150 watts. Even our Core Frozzer was doing that.
If you can still get your hands on one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I think we still have one lying around somewhere. Okay, so this is the Cinebench. I don't think many people will buy the i5 for 3D rendering, but it's just to show you how much power it can draw when all cores are loaded. So I think it would be nice to show some gaming, right?
Sounds
or
good.
do you want
Maybe let's take a quick look at the testing you also did with
okay,
with previous generations.
Yeah. Good.
So these are some test results from Ruud of his testing that he also tested the AMD 5000 series, so AM4 CPU, the previous generation AMD, as well as 12th gen Intel. So this is Cinebench 23 single-threaded. So here you also see the 13900K is, yeah, it's a bit faster also in single-threaded. Mostly has to do with those higher clock speeds.
Yeah.
And here you see that especially the 5000 series AMD in terms of single-threaded is a bit back. If we take a look at multi-threaded, that's where you will see a big jump if you compare the 12900K and 12900KS with the 13900K. Yeah. That of course mostly has to do just with the additional cores. So single-threaded, you see the higher clock speeds mostly, and here you really see the extra E-cores that you get with the new generation. You also see that AMD is not too far behind. So 7950X is, it is not as fast in the Cinebench 23 multi-threaded benchmark, but it's not extremely far behind, where you see that the previous generations are quite far back if you compare these directly.
Yeah, they both made an extreme jump in multi-core loads. Yeah.
But
by the way, this is a test is run 2.5 minutes or 150 seconds with logging in the background. So the performance can be a little bit higher if you just run a single run of Cinebench 23. Yeah. So 40.5 or 40.7 thousand points on the 13900K is also doable, and 38,000 points on 7950X is also possible.
But this doesn't tell you anything about efficiency yet.
No.
So if we take a look at the wall power, for example, we saw that the 5000 series were a bit slower, but also the power consumption on the 5950X is significantly lower.
Yeah.
Not only compared to to the new AMD series, but even more so to the 13th gen Intel.
Yeah, we were amazed when the 12900KS came that it was uncoolable and uncontrolled power, and the 13900 basically does exactly the same.
Yeah, so it's basically just maxing out whatever cooler you throw at it.
Yeah. I think you will not reach the power limit with regular water coolers, so maybe a custom loop could provide enough cooling.
But if you, for example, one step further is efficiency, so how much performance do you get per watt basically. And that's where you see that actually the 5950X does very well. So here you really see that also the new AMD is really pushed, even though the architecture itself and the process is more efficient than the previous generation, the default settings are really pushed beyond that, so it becomes more inefficient.
Yeah.
So at stock speeds, the 5950X will give you better efficiency than the 7950X. Does it mean that it is more efficient? No, because you can get even better efficiency with the 7950X, but you have to adjust your settings for that. Yeah, Intel in terms of efficiency, this is where you really see the difference a bit. So Intel is usually a bit faster, AMD is still more efficient. That's what you also see here. But in terms of efficiency, the newer generation Intel, the 13th gen, is doing better than the previous generation, the 12th gen, because it has more of those efficient E-cores. I think this is a good time for another winner in our giveaway.
Okay.
So, if you haven't participated yet, go to msi.com/2/insider, or if you're watching on Twitch or YouTube, you can also follow the direct link that the bot will put in the chat once every 5 minutes. And our next winner for today is Ruud. The honor is all yours.
I think it's Break2Twin.
Yes, Break2Twin. Congratulations! You also won a Steam wallet code.
Break2Twin. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but
so keep an eye out in your mailbox. Then we will email the code to you in the coming days with some instructions on how to redeem it. Okay. Back to your testing.
Okay, I think we saw the power and performance part of the CPU, but it's a different story if you go into gaming. For example, if you game, then don't expect 300 watts on your CPU. It might it might do more watts on your GPU, of course, depending on what title you're running. So let's see if we can do that side by side. Of course, the graphics cards on these two systems are not very equal. Let's set this one up as well.
Mr. Masterlock says, looks like AMD is still better performance per watt. I think that it is correct, yeah. Especially if you fine-tune it a bit, then performance per watt also on a new generation can be really good. And that, of course, not only has to do with the new architecture, but also the new 5nm production process that it was built on.
Okay, I have two keyboards in front of me and two mice, and usually I'm touching the wrong one.
It's always confusing if you have so many.
So that happens a lot. Basically, setting up both of them.
NRT says it's all good. The more Intel and AMD push each other, the better for us. Yeah, eventually it is. We, of course, well, quite a few generations back, before AMD launched their Ryzen series, there was not that much competition for Intel in the generations AMD had before. So we also saw that the development of Intel also slowed down a bit because there was no necessity in terms to get the maximum possible. As soon as AMD launched Ryzen, they started introducing more cores on their processor, and then you also saw that Intel, for example, started following them. So then you saw a core increase on Intel as well. So usually for the end user, it's beneficial if Intel and AMD are close to each other, because they will develop faster, and you also have something to choose from. So right now, if you want to have like maximum performance, you can go for Intel, for example. If you're building maybe a smaller form factor system and you want to have better efficiency, then AMD could be the more logical choice. So you really can get something that fits your needs, rather than that one of them is always the better choice.
So this is the 4090 system with the i9. I'm running that in one 1080p mode, and I've enabled ray tracing without DLSS, just to give the graphics card something to do, otherwise it doesn't do anything.
And 1080p at 4090 is not doing that much anyway.
So yeah, and with the RX 6650 XT, I'm doing the same settings, but without the ray tracing. So I'm also on 1080p, but I disabled the ray tracing part, so this all is off. So that's the difference. Then we can run them side by side, and I think Michiel can, yeah,
there we go,
do side by side view.
So of course these two are very different systems with very different graphics cards, but at least you get an idea in terms of what basically the highest end possible system will give you compared to a more price performance oriented system.
So here you can see the power draw of the i9, and behind Michiel.
Oh, made it. Whoa,
no, the other one.
Other way. Yeah, there we go.
So here it says about 94, and the other one says 46, 47, 45.
Right.
So that's roughly the power draw at the moment. But I must say it's unfair, because that one is lower the voltage more than this one. So basically both are lower than stock. So if you run it stock, this will probably be more into the 105 to 110, and the other one would be in the 60s. So also 10 watts higher. So even undervolted, you'll lose some power in the gaming as well. But the gaming difference between the CPUs in 3D rendering is of course much higher. The difference is much bigger than in gaming. However, it's still almost double. So, but in stock speeds, in stock voltages, then it's about 60 to 105 watts. So.
Mr. Masterlock says the price difference does not justify the performance difference. The right system is 2.5 times the price of the left system. And it also depends a bit on what. Of course, we're testing here in 1080p.
Yeah.
That's not really where a 4090 is meant for.
No.
If you would, for example, play Cyberpunk with everything maxed out on 4K resolution, it will become a different story, because at that point, the system on my side becomes unplayable, where you can still properly play.
We can also set up the i9 with the 4090 to 4K. Then it will be more in its real environment, I would say, or configuration. Let's try that. Then you can also see the frames per second will drop a lot, and that will also drop the power of the CPU. I'm pressing the wrong keyboard again.
And right now, of course, we're testing 1080p, so you're very CPU limited usually. And in gaming, the i5 and the i9 are actually not that far apart. So that's why you will see that performance will be a bit closer than what you may have expected to see.
I need to change the desktop resolution, otherwise Formula 1 22 is not switching correctly to the 4K resolution. So let's try that again.
As Mesler says, Cyberpunk, the only game that needs a 4090. At this point, I would say indeed the 4090 is quite overkill for most games. But
I think we can show quite a good utilization on this game as well. For this, even for this massive graphics card. At the moment it's still at
JPSH Racer Gaming says, I still play 1080p with a 240 Hz monitor, especially if you're then playing esports games, for example. Usually you will be more CPU bound rather than GPU bound, so then it wouldn't make much sense to go for the highest end graphics card. Colonel Strikes asking, hello MSI, any statement about Z790 Unify and Unify X? Not at this point. Maybe in the future, maybe not.
I need to make the...
Green Lantern is asking, is it true that AMD chipsets work better with AMD GPUs? Not really, you can mix them perfectly fine. As you can see, the 6600 XT runs fine on an Intel chipset as well.
So now it's running 4K. The i9 with the 49 is running 4K with ray tracing enabled, DLSS disabled. So you can see that the power of the graphics card is going up quite a bit. Oh, my finger is cut up here.
Camera stops at a certain
yeah,
point.
exactly. 445 watts at the moment. But you can also see that the CPU dropped from roughly 90-ish watts to 60-ish watts. So, yeah. So this is more like an equal playing field for the CPU. So the CPU power doesn't shoot up that much if you're GPU bound and not CPU bound anymore. So the more frames per second you're going to push out, if you go into the 400 FPS, then the CPU will draw more power because the CPU needs to supply data to the GPU more frequently.
So don't compare frame rates here in terms of, hey, the mid-range system is faster than the high end. Of course, these are very different resolutions.
Yeah. But just by chance, it's both Alpine cars now, so that's good. and yeah.
Does that mean they will break down?
Might be. They're fast this year, so.
Yeah, they're pretty fast.
But this is, of course, with the underclocked part, so yeah. Underclocked, undervolted actually, yeah. Lower the power a bit.
Furman saying my 49 Supreme is really not overkill in 4K. It can even reach 120 FPS in campaign and CD Modern Warfare. Still not really enough for Cyberpunk Cyberpunk at 4K. Yeah, it depends a bit on what you do. If you want to max everything out at 4K with ray tracing and not using DLSS, then you make it extremely tough on even a 4090. Yeah. But with DLSS already makes quite a big difference. But yeah, then of course you're not running the native 4K resolution. But yeah, you can definitely max out a 4090. But if you go for like, we were testing in 1080p before, then a 4090 would be overkill because basically every game is very easy for a 4090 on 1080p, even Cyberpunk.
Yeah, if you look at the CPU utilization, it's about 20% for the i5 and about 12% for the i9 in this configuration.
Gregos is saying 13600K is a new gaming king.
Yeah,
I think you could say that. In terms of gaming performance, the price is a very interesting CPU if you're building a gaming system. Especially if you don't do any rendering and you don't care about the extra cores that the i5 or i7 and i9 will give you compared to an i5, then definitely i5 will be the way to go. You don't lose much in gaming performance at all with an i5.
No. And yeah, personally, I think also for the video editing part, I think the i5 is fine. I haven't tested that in much detail, but probably others will do that much better than me. Because it's still a
powerful CPU. It still has 6P cores, 8E cores. But if you're, for example, doing a lot of rendering professionally, and if it's like your daily job, then it would be beneficial to go for a higher end CPU because it will basically save you time and earn you more money usually if it's your job. Coco Bongo is asking Twitch chat, do you prefer 13600K or 13600KF? Is there any performance difference? No, they basically perform identical. The only difference is that the K has integrated graphics and the KF does not. Which also means that, for example, if you want to use a feature like QuickSync or something, you need to have the iGPU. But in terms of like standard performance, there is no difference between a 13600K and a 13600KF. So if you're planning on building a gaming system, you're not using QuickSync, and you use a discrete graphics card, you can also go for the KF. That's no problem at all. Charlie Holmes is asking, would MSI ever do a partnership with a company like Be Quiet for a case or GPU setup similar to how a certain competitor did with Noctua? I think when I look at our current graphics card lineup, there is not much need to. I think our coolers are very good, very efficient, very silent. So I don't think it would bring that much. Because, for example, like the card we're using today is the RTX 4090 Supreme X. Even though the power consumption of a 4090 can be really high, it's still extremely silent even under load, and the temperatures are still impressively low. So I think the cooler is already that good that I don't think that would bring that much, honestly. And you would have two companies needing to make margin on it, so it will make something more expensive. So I doubt if it would be worth it. Kitty Cat's asking, does the 4090 still work after it fell off the tiny motherboard? That was not us. We didn't drop that off. It was a competitor one. I know which video you mean. But no, we didn't drop a 4090 off an ITX motherboard.
Who did? Media or what?
Huh?
A Media did? Or?
No. Competitor of ours.
Oh, okay.
They were demonstrating a 4090 on a mini ITX, and then the card dropped off.
Did the motherboard tip over, or?
No, I think it was just the weight and the way it was just separately, not in a case. So and if you have the PCI Express slot, it only holds at one side. So basically it released on the other side, the side where you usually screw it in a case. And then, of course, it suddenly released from the whole motherboard and dropped on, I think it was a table or something.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine that happening, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially micro ITX, you only have 4 support screws, so yeah. Anyway.
But no, luckily we, even Eric didn't destroy a 4090 so far.
You didn't?
No, not that I know of at least. But Marco is asking on Twitch chat, will there be DDR4 boards or just DDR5? There are also DDR4 boards in our Z790 lineup. So you still get to choose whether you want DDR4 or DDR5. And also with the 13 Gen, you can also combine it with a previous generation motherboard. So if you still want to use a Z690 or even B660 or something, you can also, I could, for example, if you don't want to overclock with it, as there is not that much overclocking headroom anyway, I think it could be very interesting also to combine a 13 Gen with a B660 motherboard maybe. I think for many users that could definitely be an interesting option for a price performance system.
I was about to set up the CSGO, and the i9 with the 4090 is running 4K, and the other one is running at 1080p. And we created a benchmark run for it. Let's see what the performance does on both systems.
Vilkasi is asking, are you still producing the Pro Z690-8 DDR5? To my knowledge, yes.
So even the 4K resolution cannot keep the 4090 busy all the time.
So here you really see how CPU bound this is, because in 4K resolution,
Yes,
it's
I know,
still getting the
because
higher FPS.
you only get like 10% load, so that's probably 1 or 2 cars doing something. But yeah, it has 32 threads, so maybe 2 threads are working. Yeah.
So a lot of the system is just idling at this point.
Yeah. That's also what you can see in the CPU power. It's in the 60s and 50s. So. Also, the GPU power is low, so it's not even maxing out the 6650 XT, because it's only doing 100 watts, and the power limit of that one is 150. Pfoxy says that's an okay board for a 13600K, right? I think you mean the Pro Z690-8 DDR5.
Yeah, no problem. That can run that CPU fine. And especially if Z790 doesn't have any features that specifically appeal to you, or if you need like a lot of PCI Express Gen 4 M.2, then you can definitely go for that board with the 13600K. It will not cost you any CPU performance compared to Z790, for example. Andres Chavez says, I need a 4090, but I already sold both my kidneys. I'm sure you have more intestines. You still have a heart and stuff, and I'm not sure what the current state of your liver is, but maybe that one. Florian says, I don't know whether you talked about it, but I'm wondering whether to upgrade for Intel 13 Gen or wait for AMD latest Gen with 3D cache. I don't know anything about those yet. I even don't know if AMD is working on those. So I honestly cannot tell you anything about that yet. Seth Week is asking, do you think 12700K is still worth it? Very much depends on the price. If you can get it at a low price, it could definitely be worth it. It's still a good CPU. Star Citizen 88 is asking on Twitch, what CPU cooler do you use? Right now on the system with the Core i9, we're using the MEG Core Liquid S360. So basically the highest end all-in-one liquid cooler in our lineup. And on the i5 system, we're using the MEG Core Liquid 240R V2.
V2, yeah. That comes with the socket 1700 bracket.
Yeah, and 240 millimeter radiator, which is fine for the i5. Yeah. But for the i7 and i9, you're probably looking at a bigger radiator.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it finished the benchmark, and the 6650 was still able to achieve 672 average FPS and 305 1% lows. And the 4090 on 4K resolution did 800 FPS average and 313 1% lows.
So basically, we could conclude that CSGO has become too easy for today's systems.
Yeah. Maybe you can do 2 sessions on the same system and 2 people playing.
I think you could have like a 5 versus 5 lobby.
Yeah,
and all run it on the same system.
Yeah, so this is not a test for even a 6650 is not maxed out on this one. So yeah. But this goes to show that the CPUs today are so fast that they can go insane FPS in CSGO. So 4K, 800 FPS, 800 Hertz monitors needed? Yeah, maybe.
See, Evil Saturn is saying in Twitch chat, run Cyberpunk, not this. Well, the thing with Cyberpunk is it's very GPU intensive. Yeah. So if you want to know something about the CPUs, it doesn't make sense to go for the most demanding game, because the GPU will be the bottleneck. So you're not really showing anything of the CPU. Yeah. But if you're interested in, for example, 4090 Cyberpunk performance, we did test that in our previous RTX 4090 live stream. So definitely check that out if you're interested in how that performs in
But I agree, you don't buy a 4090 for CSGO. No. Or even for Formula 1 22. You can run
Formula 1 you could, if you have like a triple monitor, high resolution setup.
I mean, you just saw on 4K it was doing 450 watts, so yes, if you want to have all the bells and whistles on without DLSS, then this GPU can still get some FPS on the.
And I think quite a lot of
display.
people actually do play F1 with 3 monitors, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So there, yeah, I don't think triple monitor is that popular for CS:GO. So for CS:GO, don't bother for a 4090.
No, I think the 4K on CS:GO is already, not reality, but just
Let's
see
maybe
what
take
is possible.
a quick look to compare the performance of the current generation to the previous generations. Here you can actually see quite a big gap, especially compared to the Ryzen 5000 series. So a 5950X is relatively far behind compared to the newer both AMD and Intel CPUs. Intel 12 Gen was already very quick in Counter-Strike. Actually not that far behind the current generations. Here you really see that at a certain point, it doesn't really matter anymore how fast it is.
By the way, these results are done with the RTX 3090 Ti Supreme X. So it's not the 4090.
No.
But we ran the 4090 just before on also the same resolution, 1080p high resolution, and also did 840 FPS, so very similar to this result. So the 4090 or the 3090 Ti don't matter in this game. So all my game benchmarks in those charts are done with 3090 Ti.
Coco Bongo is saying in Twitch chat, I see DDR4 5066 MHz CL20 16 gig on the market for low prices. Have you compared it with any DDR5 with these frequencies with DDR4? Would it be a good option to go for lower budget systems? Like basically, should you go for lower frequency DDR5 or maybe higher frequency DDR4? Ruud, what would your suggestion be?
I think that that's extremely high frequency DDR4 and with quite low cache latency. So I'm not sure if that's really cheap compared to the cheaper DDR5. I think TechSpot or Hardware Unboxed did a good comparison for DDR4 and DDR5 in gaming, and it doesn't really matter that much. So even the cheaper DDR5, I think they had 4800.
4800, yeah.
CL40, I think. So that's basically the cheapest DDR5 on the market, and it didn't really do any worse than any of the DDR4 models, so even the faster ones.
The thing is also DDR4 5066 megahertz is really high. It will put way more strain on your memory controller, and I could even see some CPUs struggling to reach that frequency. So maybe your modules can do it, but if the memory controller in your CPU cannot, then you still have to run it at a lower frequency. Whereas if you go for DDR5, it will, well, right now we're using 6000 and it's still peanuts for the DDR5 controller in the CPU because the 13th gen already officially supports up to 5600. So personally, I would suggest going for DDR5 rather than the extremely high frequency DDR4. I think it will be more prone to issues.
Yeah, me too. Also, I think DDR5, most of the modules are 16 gigabytes. So you already have the dual channel in each DIMM. So that helps a little bit also with the maximum throughput rate. Maybe the latency is a little bit higher, but I think that will compensate. So I think in most benchmarks it doesn't really matter that much. Maybe in some extreme cases it will show better one or the other. I think especially the AIDA memory benchmarks is really famous, but it just tests memory, so it's not really an application that people use. Also, the 7-zip, I saw there's a big difference in the 7-zip benchmark, but there isn't a big difference between when you actually compress a folder with 7-zip between DDR4 and DDR5. So the benchmark isn't telling you the same as the application is.
During your explanation, I decided that it was a good time to pick another winner for a giveaway. So if you haven't participated yet, go to msi.com/2/insider or follow the direct link that our bot will put in the chat on Twitch and YouTube once every 5 minutes. And our next winner for today, Ruud, the honor is all yours.
The Jake 27.
Congratulations, you also won a Steam wallet code. So if you haven't participated yet, make sure to still do so. So the Jake 27, also keep an eye out on your mailbox, then we will email the code to you in the coming days with some instructions on how to redeem it. We're still not out of code yet, so make sure to sign up. Ruud, you did some more testing with games. Maybe let's take a quick look at those. One you did was Far Cry. And here you see something quite interesting.
Yeah, this title is kind of brutal for the AMD CPU. So the Intels are all faster. Even the newer AM5 model is not really catching up.
So this is not really representative for all games, but no. Especially like Far Cry 6 leans very heavily towards Intel in terms of performance.
Yeah. So this also happens. In most cases, Intel is faster, so the 13 Gen or the 13900.
But usually not by this much. And also, like previous Gen Intel is still quite a bit faster here than current Gen AMD. That's quite
Yeah, that's not always the case with the games I've tested, and most games I've tested on a low resolution, so 1080p, mostly on ultra settings. But for a 3090 Ti, that's not really a high setting anyway. And so the CPU bottleneck should show up, but not sure what happens here for AMD. They in the first Ryzen generation, they had a big issue with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, or was it Rise of the Tomb Raider at that time? Not sure, but both of the Tomb Raiders, they had issues on the first Ryzen, and it might be an architectural thing or whatever, or maybe it's a cache thing. I don't know.
Mr. Masterdoc says 5800 X3D missing. Well, simple reason for that is that we didn't have one of those on hand.
No.
We did have one in a live stream earlier, but unfortunately we had to return that one.
I think it went home with the AMD guy, right?
Yeah, I think so. yeah.
So he showed it, here it is, and now I'm going to take it back home.
Yeah, I think it was Martijn's only sample as well. So.
Yeah. I would have preferred some testing with that one too, I agree, yeah. I would have loved to have those that data also in my database.
Yeah, and because, for example, in gaming, the 5800 X3D, you can expect that one to be faster than the 5950X.
And you can also see if that's really the cache part or not.
Yeah. But yeah, unfortunately, we didn't have that available for this test.
Yeah. Of course, the Ryzen 9 5950 was with DDR4 and the 7950 was with DDR5 because those systems are only DDR4 or only DDR5.
And the Intel ones are both DDR5, I think, right?
These results, yes.
Yeah.
I also had a different table with also the DDR4, but the differences were not that much.
Yeah.
I think the only difference was the Watch Dogs Legion was a little bit lower on DDR4. But that also responds very well or very badly to lower cache or higher, faster cache or more cache. Yeah.
Fliskin is asking Twitch chat, did I miss anything? Bathroom time? Oh, actually just gave away RTX 4090s to everyone in the chat, but yeah, you were in the bathroom, so unfortunately. Just kidding. Another game you tested, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and this is more representative, right, of how the balance is between Intel and AMD at the moment. So the Far Cry 6 leaned very heavily towards Intel, and this is, basically the latest generations of both Intel and AMD on top, and the previous generations underneath.
I think this also shows a bit of the single thread performance in the Cinebench is more like this one as well. So the 13900K is definitely faster than the rest. And the 7950 and the 12900s are basically at the same level, more or less. Yeah.
So quite interesting though that the 1% lows of the i9s are still a bit higher than 7950X.
Yeah.
So it looks like for some reason, I don't know if you have an idea about that, Intel seems to be more stable in their frame rates.
Could be, yeah. But it's not a huge difference. It's like 163 to 182 or 173 with the 12900 KS.
Mr. Mestrak says, looks like Intel is slightly ahead now, but as soon as AMD releases X3D chips, will likely lose its crown. I think it depends very much on the use case.
Yeah, depends on if the game is really triggered by the cache or not.
Yeah.
Some games don't respond at all.
First of all, I don't know if AMD will release those or not.
Yeah.
But also,
yeah.
for example, for like multi-threaded heavy rendering workloads, you actually see that the X3D, the 5800 X3D is actually slower than the regular 5800X.
Yeah.
Because the clocks of the X3D model in that situation are a bit lower. So for certain use cases, X3D or the 3D cache will actually hurt performance rather than increase it. Yeah. But I think you specifically mean about gaming, and there could indeed be the difference for AMD, because indeed Intel by default in gaming is a bit faster now.
Yeah, and these benchmarks, these games and settings are chosen specifically to show the differences between the CPU. It's not a real, I think it's not a real scenario that people with a 3090 Ti will go play Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1080p.
No, probably they will play this in a higher resolution, and then of course it leads more towards the GPU.
Yeah. So this is just to show you the differences, and
basically it's like an exaggerated test to exaggerate differences between CPUs.
Exactly.
Yeah. People in chat, do you still have any specific demonstrations that you would like? Because we now have the i5 and the i9 system here. We're a bit limited on the games we can show, so I think we only have the CSGO and the F1 2022 installed now. But also if you maybe want to see certain BIOS settings, certain power settings on either the i5 or the i9 that we can demonstrate and maybe put it on a load and see what it does. So if you're curious about something specific, this is your time to drop it in chat. Because Ruud is here now anyway, so let's make use of it.
Yeah, I did prepare one thing that I wanted to show, but we forgot when it was running. The wall power during the F1 4K resolution on the 4090 and the 6650 in 1080p resolution. So the
we can still run that.
Huh?
Let's fire it up.
Oh, okay, yeah, we can do that, no problem.
In the meanwhile, people can drop their requests in the chat, and then we can still run that benchmark. Action Brother says, for your information, F1 22 is free to try this weekend on all platforms. That's good to know. I wasn't aware of that.
I did see that one, yeah. I need to change the resolution on this one again.
Maybe they were like, the real F1 season is basically over. Let's drag people to the game. Mr. Masterrock says, maybe next time include Civilization. It's good to compare CPU. That may be an interesting one, right?
Yeah. The problem with most of those games is that they are hard to benchmark if they don't have a built-in one. And I don't play those games, but if you have like a save game with a lot of stuff going on, then usually it can bring almost any CPU to its knees because it's just too much to handle, probably.
NRT says, after that, can you please enable DLSS and run it again? I actually think that if you're like very much CPU limited, DLSS won't make that much of a difference.
Oh yeah, we can show that anyway, just to see
we can run it,
what the bump in FPS is.
And Leslie is asking about how much does the 13600K bottleneck in 1080p or 1440p with 4090 compared to 13900K. Not by that much, especially both in lower and higher resolutions wouldn't make that much of a difference, because the i5 is not far off in gaming performance. And especially if you go for higher resolutions, it will be more GPU bound. But yeah, I don't expect the i5 to be much of a bottleneck in terms of gaming performance. The real difference between those CPUs is when doing rendering workloads and stuff like that, not gaming.
We're still undervolted, so my example is the same as what I did before the stream. Shouldn't matter that much though. I don't know if you have the close-up cam ready.
Yes. Just tell me when to switch.
Oh, you can switch.
Yep.
It's already fired up. So we have about 620-ish. A minute ago was 630 against 308 watts. So the difference is about 300 watts.
It's basically double.
Basically double, yeah. You pay 2.5 times and you get double the power consumption.
But it's rendering four times as many pixels.
Yeah, with ray tracing.
With ray tracing, yeah. Coco Bonga says you showed motherboard B660 more Max Wi-Fi DDR4 earlier. Will it continue to support base clock overclocking for 13 gen? Yeah, I think that shouldn't be an issue. I haven't tested that combination yet, but I think it should work. Louis is asking in YouTube chat, do you know if using an integrated graphics CPU reduce the charge, I think you mean load on the GPU, or is it relatively the same? Well, basically, if you run a program, so there can be a game, you will run it on either the iGPU or the discrete graphics card. So if you're running this on a discrete graphics card, your integrated graphics will not unload the discrete graphics. Basically, your integrated graphics will not be running anything of that game. So no, in terms of loading your GPU, no difference if you're using a CPU with or without integrated graphics. Tom3D2 is saying room heater not required with the 4090. If you really challenge that card, then indeed you don't need much heating anymore in your room. You may need air conditioning to cool down though. Action Bro says 600 watts still sounds okay for an i9 with 4090 in my opinion. In gaming, yeah, in gaming it's by no means as bad as when you would fully load both components. So actually, quite a few months ago already, when Intel launched the 12900KS, we tested it together with the 3090 Ti, and we ran both at maximum load. So basically running, I think we were running Furmark and Prime 95 simultaneously, and then we pushed it over 1000 watts. But it's not a very realistic scenario. You're basically torture testing your CPU and your GPU at the same time. If you're gaming, there will never actually be a situation where both your CPU and well, it is already hard to, in a game you won't really load your CPU 100%, and if it's CPU bound, you will also not load your GPU 100%. So then the power consumption will never be what it can be in theory for those components. So if you're gaming on a Core i9 and a 4090, don't expect to hit like 1000 plus watts, because it will not draw that in a normal gaming scenario. Let's maybe have a quick look again.
Yeah, so I switched to DLSS now, so 4K with ray tracing and DLSS turned on, and it's still drawing about 610 watts, so difference still around 300 watts. So slightly lower than the one without the DLSS, but the frame rate went up from I think it was in the 90s to about 160s. So if we switch back to the switch screen, then the 169
I was quickly
frames
banning
per
someone
second,
from
something
YouTube
like
chat,
that.
one
Yeah.
of the spammers.
Also the difference is that the GPU has dropped from 450 watts to 410 watts, something like that. But the CPU has increased from, I don't know what it was exactly, about 50 watts to 80 watts. So that's why.
Says, so why is everyone recommending a 1000 watt PSU for 4090? Is 850 watt PSU not enough, or do you really need bigger headroom? It very much depends also on what CPU you're combining it with, and how much you want to load them simultaneously. But for gaming, I would say in most situations an 850 watt power supply, if it's a good 850 watt power supply, that's an important thing there. It should be okay.
Yeah, I think if you want to show maximum power in a game, then Cyberpunk would be a good one because that loads the CPU also very heavily. Then you're talking about, I think, around 125 watts of CPU power and 450 plus watts for the GPU. So that's about maximum for gaming. But if you would do like a stress test with Thermark and Prime 95, then you'll probably max out both CPU and GPU, and then you can.
Then you will be able to get it on its knees. Yeah.
So just those two parts will draw about 750 watts on this system. If you can cool it, that is. At the moment we can. So then you add like 100 watts for the rest, like the motherboard and the memory, the SSD, and the inefficiency of the power circuits and stuff.
AZM Venom says it's for the CPU/GPU power spikes. Well, actually, if you have like a good 850 watt power supply, that one can deliver a continuous 850 watts of power.
Yeah.
So it actually can go beyond 850 watts to get those spikes. So for example, the test that we did with the 12900 KS and the 3090 Ti, we ran it on a 1000 watt power supply, and even if you go beyond the 1000 watts, it's not like the system will drop right away.
No.
It can handle those spikes because the power supply can handle 1000 watts of continuous power.
Yeah, plus we measured on the AC side, so
yeah, you always have a little bit of efficiency loss. Yeah.
So the power going into the motherboard and the graphics card will be less than the 1050 we drew.
Yeah.
So yeah. So probably would be more like 900 something.
But I'm not sure if it still happens, but like more of the sketchy power supply manufacturers sometimes had like they advertised with the maximum power that a power supply could deliver instead of the continuous power, and that makes the story quite a bit different. But yeah, for example, the power.
If people can scam people, they will probably still do that.
Yeah. But if you have like a high quality power supply that can deliver a continuous 850 watts of power, especially for gaming usage, you should be able to run a 4090 just fine.
Yeah.
And it should also still be able to handle any power spikes that go beyond the 850 watt. If it's only for a short period,
is about a minimum. Yeah. So 750 I wouldn't recommend.
For a 4090, no. Then you're pushing it.
Yeah. Most recommendations you'll find from NVIDIA or from manufacturers like MSI and others, they are always on the safe side, you know. So.
Yeah. And if you do optimization, then of course 750 could be fine. Like if you set certain power limits, even for the 4090, you can set power limits and barely lose any performance because the efficiency sweet spot is a bit lower than what it's set at by default. So if you do some optimization and set some power limits, then you can perfectly run a 4090 also off a 750 watt power supply. But at stock settings, I would go 850 up in most situations. Well, of course, depending on your CPU as well. Abhinay is asking Mike and Ruud, where's the B660 Modern Max motherboard with external clock generator? It's not in stock anywhere. Please MSRP 2. Actually, it should be out, but I'm not sure if it's available in every market. So it's hard for me to comment that because I don't know the availability in every individual region in the world. But it should be on the market by now. MSRP, I believe, I don't know the exact value, but it should be, I think, $20 higher than a regular mortar, approximately. So if you know the price of that one in your region, then you should approximately know where the max sits. But I'm not sure about exact global availability of that model. AZM Venom says you're kind of cheating yourself if you limit your GPU power draw. It's like buying a 3080 Ti, lowering settings to 3070. Not really, because all the additional cores that you have with that GPU, and because it is already pushed quite far beyond its sweet spot, makes it that you actually barely lose any performance by reducing quite a lot in the power limit. That's also something Peter actually demonstrated in our 4090 live stream, so definitely check that out, because you can reduce it quite a bit with barely losing any performance. By no means as much performance loss as you would have when you would have a lower skew. So right now in the 4000 series, of course, there is only the 4090. But if NVIDIA were to launch lower end models in the future, I don't think you would lose that much by decreasing your power limit a bit compared to the step you would have to the next.
There's one note I want to mention here for the 4090 and lowering the power limits. I see quite a bit of articles or reviews online, people talking about performance and saying, okay, I lowered the power limit to this and this is the performance. But some of those reviews are lacking information, and the part that's lacking is the power. Did it actually need the 450 watts during that game in default settings?
Yeah, did it actually draw it before?
You didn't lower anything.
Yeah.
So like the test I'm running now, it's doing 405 watts. So if I lower the power limit to 420, it will do nothing. So if the power limit is at 600 or 420, it wouldn't do anything in this game. It wouldn't draw less power, it wouldn't perform any less, right? So if I would lower it to 350, yeah, then performance will be less and power will be less, but it won't be, the gap will not be the amount of watts of difference between the power limits. It's how much power it actually draws.
So even if the max board power is like 480 watts, it doesn't mean that in every situation it actually does draw it.
In the CSGO you saw it was drawing only 200 watts.
Yeah. But so, if you, for example, want to use a lower wattage power supply, that can put you in the safe zone if you power limit it, for example, to 400 watts. Because then you're sure your GPU will never draw more than that 400 watts.
And in smaller systems you can also get by with a lower cooler.
Yeah.
So less airflow, less noise, yeah, possible. I think the undervolting part will be more interesting. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Divina says strong performance from the 6650 XT in this game. Yeah, I think for F1 2022, it's a very decent card to run it on. I also think it's a very nice combination with that new 13600K in terms of performance. Astrid Rockman wants me to play the F1 game. I think I played the previous one on stream once. Actually, Eric did play this on the stream in VR. That was also quite funny to watch. But I don't have a steering wheel or anything here. I think F1 you should play with the steering wheel. Personally, I believe that. Skeet says, why would you ever limit FPS?
Yeah, that's a reply to Vilvaki, something like that.
Ah, yeah, I see.
Yeah, limiting the FPS would lower the power as well. Or sometimes even for games that are not, you don't need really fast-paced gaming. Why not just enable VSync? The GPU will throttle itself. So it won't consume any more power than just to reach your 144 FPS if your monitor is 144 Hertz.
As Roman says, played it in VR, was he turning his hands like a steering wheel then? He was using the VR glasses, but he was using an actual steering wheel. So he was not using the VR controllers, only the VR glasses with, I believe, a G29 steering wheel, I think. Unless Chavez says 60 FPS for a lot of games is more than enough. It depends very much on the type of games. For a lot of games, yes, like strategy games, I would still say it plays more comfortable at a higher FPS, but it's not really necessary. For shooters, but also other fast-paced games like Rocket League and stuff, you really notice a huge difference if you're playing at 60 FPS or like 144 up. So for fast-paced games, I would say higher FPS will give you a way better experience.
If you limit it at 144 Hertz, then in most cases, you don't need 600 FPS in CSGO either. At least I don't think so. Some people will disagree though. The more the better, they say.
Yeah. But yeah, it depends. Like for a very competitive game, yes, then the more the better. But if you're just chilling and maybe playing a strategy game or something, then it doesn't really make any sense. Aussie Gaming is saying left side better. How? Well, it's running at 1080p on the left side and 4K on the right side.
Yeah, with ray tracing.
With ray tracing. So that's why you will see a higher FPS on the left side right now.
You can tell by the on-screen display is smaller on the 1080p side.
Yeah.
I can influence that, but I think it's already maximum size. Oh, it can be bigger. I think this is good.
Edwin K is asking, when is there an MSI version of the Intel Arc for professional use coming? That's something you would have to ask Peter. He's our VGA guy. I have no idea.
I haven't seen anything yet.
No, me neither. Nina says Radeon at 150 watt and 4090 at 400 plus watts. Yes, like the mid-range graphics cards in terms of efficiency, they're usually very good because they're more on that sweet spot. Whereas the 4090 is of course really a card that is pushed for maximum performance.
I think Ryzen 5 with a card like that is enough for many people.
Yeah.
So and it's still reasonably affordable.
Yeah, or an i5 like in this situation, Ryzen 5, i5.
Or Ryzen 5, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Can also be an older Ryzen or i5, no problem.
Currently we're at, so a little over 600 watts.
Yeah, it doesn't change that much, no.
Yeah. So this is the power draw from the wall right now. And actually this is also slightly skewed because the higher end system is actually using quite a bit more efficient power supply. It's a 80 plus platinum one, whereas it's an 80 plus bronze right now for the i5 system. So actually the system on the right is losing a bit more in terms of efficiency from the power supply than the higher end system. Ruud, I have some more benchmark results from you that maybe we can quickly take a look at before we close it off for today.
Yeah, okay.
Because you also tested in Handbrake.
Oh yeah.
And this is an interesting one because it's quite a big difference in between the X265 and the X264.
Yeah. The X265 loads up more cores and strains the CPU a lot more. In that test, the Intel and AMD are quite close. The new Intel and new AMD, but in X264, then Intel is just faster, way faster. Even the older gen, the 12 gen, is much faster than the AM5 Ryzen.
Yeah, it's quite a big gap indeed. Whereas for the X265, the new Ryzen is faster than the previous gen Intel.
Yeah. Of course, this is just one setting, so you can't really draw any conclusions. The X264 might be a too light load. I don't know. You have so many different settings you can change with the CPU encoding. But maybe it's more interesting to see going to AV1 encoding or something like that, or transcoding.
You also tested 7-zip.
Yeah. I just compressed the Cinebench 20 folder. And this is the result. I had more digits, but it's not really that important. I saw that the AMD was doing quite well on this test as well. So
also the previous generation AMD is quite good here. So 5950X actually outperforms the 12900K here.
Yeah, before I showed the 7-zip benchmark because it has a built-in benchmark, and it had some weird results. The AMD decompression was really way high, higher than the Intel one. But if I decompressed the created Cinebench 20 zip, then for one, it was really unzipped very fast. Compression is already very fast because it only took 13.4 seconds. So I didn't time it manually. I did it with a script, but. So this is already a very short test, so it doesn't say everything. But the decompression was more like, maybe 1 second. So, hard to to see differences there. So I'll run some more tests and a longer test, so I compress like a whole game or something and see what the differences are. Actually, more interesting to see the difference between DDR4 and DDR5, because the benchmark shows really poor results in DDR4 and very shiny results in DDR5.
But it's not
in
really
reality,
realistic.
it doesn't make that much difference on the same CPU. So if you take that 12900K with DDR4 and DDR5, the results are maybe like 5% difference maximum.
So DDR5 will be a little bit faster, but not as much as the results.
Exactly, yeah. And also depends on the speeds and the timings of DDR5.
Yeah.
I believe this one is run with the 5600 CL36 kit, and the Ryzen 9 is the 5950X is run with the DDR4 CL16 kit.
Yeah. Tessie is asking, when can you buy a Z790 motherboard in Europe? Officially, it's launching today. I don't know in every exact area when the boards will be available, but you should be able to order them starting today. Let me see. So Florimond is saying some console people even say 30 FPS enough, clearly 60 FPS minimum. I'll try 144 Hz monitor, hopefully. Prefer to see the results for myself. Yeah, I think it's definitely 144 Hz is really hard to explain, or like high refresh rate compared to 60 Hz. But I think you say clearly 60 FPS is a minimum. I know for sure that many people who are used to a high refresh rate monitor and play competitive games, they will, for example, say 144 is the minimum. Especially if you play fast-paced games, it's day and night between 60 Hz and 144 or higher. You can still, from my perception, notice it when you go like even beyond 144 Hz. But of course, at a certain point, it becomes diminishing returns. Like the difference between 60 Hz and 144 Hz in terms of how it feels is a way bigger difference than when you go from 144 to 240. Yes, you do notice the difference. 240 is definitely smoother. And in an absolute sense, the gap between 144 and 240 is bigger than the gap between 60 and 144. But in terms of feeling, the change from 60 Hz to 144 Hz is very big. Tess says MSI always having Dutch people to show new components. Not always, but often, because we always do this live stream from the Netherlands. So yeah, in this live stream, you will hear Dutch people a lot.
Yeah. Oh, it's kind of cool to be able to play with this new stuff all the time.
Yeah.
It's a good job.
Some nice toys.
Yeah, boys with toys. That's
Divina says 30 FPS is the speed of television and video. That's why they say that most LCD monitors are around 60 Hz default. Well, I think most movies are even just 24 FPS. I would say nowadays more and more broadcasts are in higher frame rates as well.
Yeah, 50 or 60.
Yeah, 50 or 60 indeed. So mostly depends on where the content is from. If it's from the US, for example, you often see 60. Formula One is, for example, a very British thing, is in 50 FPS. But yeah, you also see that in terms of, I think also like streaming platforms like Amazon and Netflix, they're also working towards higher frame rates. So I think more and more content becomes available in 60 FPS, for example. But yeah, for like passive content, like watching a movie or something, you don't get as much benefit from higher FPS than what you do when gaming, for example, because you have like active movement. So you immediately feel when you move your mouse and your screen goes with it. It's way more obvious when you're at a higher refresh rate than when you're watching something. Yeah. But you can definitely also see the difference between, for example, 30 and 60 FPS. You can clearly see it. So if you're watching, I don't know, if you're watching Counter-Strike or Rocket League on Twitch or something, and you switch between 30 and 60 FPS, you will see that 60 also looks a lot smoother when just consuming content.
Also, if you look at your mouse cursor and your monitor set to 30 Hz, then you will miss a lot of parts. It's just skipping over the screen.
Yeah, you will also get like a line behind your cursor.
Yeah, depending on how slow the screen is, yes.
Yeah. Mr. Masternox says, but if I had to choose between IPS at 240 Hz or OLED at 165, I would pick OLED. Pixel switching faster, no smearing is better than more frames at slower pixels. Depends a bit. I'm still a little bit hesitant on OLED myself, especially for computer usage, and that's because of the static components you have in the user interface, for example in Windows. OLED is still more sensitive to burn-in than, for example, LCD, so IPS, TN, VA.
Maybe it's changing with the QD OLED because they say, or they have some warranties there for burn-in as well. So
yeah, I think it is also
maybe
getting better.
change,
like
yeah.
the early OLEDs, they were horrible in terms of burn-in. So it is getting better. And for TV, it's not as big of an issue as it is for computer usage, because on your TV you usually don't have as many static elements as what you have on your PC. Like if you're not playing a game, so if you're just in Windows, your taskbar is always there. So that's a risk for burn-in, for example. But yeah, OLED definitely has its benefits in terms of pixel refresh, but also contrast. Of course, black is really black on OLED. It will never be completely black on an LCD screen, simply because the technology doesn't allow it. But yeah, it also depends on the person. Some people really care about that extremely high refresh rates. Others care more about the visuals of something or pixel response times. Story N says, of course in Twitch chat, imagine having Twitch layout burned into your screen. I definitely think certain people that basically live on Twitch could eventually see some burn-in if they would be using an OLED. So, before we close it off for today, shall we pick one more winner for today's giveaway?
Okay.
Our last winner for today is, still drawing, one of the regulars,
yeah,
and
exactly.
I'm sure this person is in the chat. Mr. Masterdox, congratulations.
Yeah.
You also won one of the Steam wallet codes. And of course, couldn't miss, you won it with the loyalty bonus. Congrats. So to all winners, keep an eye out in your mailbox, then we'll email the wallet codes to you in the coming days with some instructions on how to redeem it. Next week, I think it should be Ralph. He's going to talk about the latest all-in-one PCs, so in the modern series, some new models. So definitely check that out. I hope you found everything interesting today, Ruud. Thank you so much for joining and all the demonstrations again. Let me see some more questions. When is MSI building a pre-built with energy-efficient gaming system with low power usage? Actually, I think many of the pre-builds are already quite efficient. Of course, when you go like for the very top-end SKU, will be different. But maybe that would be an interesting one. I'll pass on your suggestion, like maybe with some pre-tuning in the BIOS and certain power limits. Could be an interesting one.
We have one pre-built, a gaming system without a graphics card, so that should be power efficient.
Yeah, but also if you have like certain presets in your power limit with the graphics card, you can still get quite a lot out of that.
Yeah. Maybe make like a nerf button on the front, so you can have turbo or nerf.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, guys, we're going to close it off for today. Thank you so much for joining today. Hope to see you again next week when Ralph's going to talk about all-in-ones. Not sure yet who will be there to join with him. Could be me, could be Eric, could be Peter, not sure. We will save up Ruud for some more demonstrations in the future.
Yeah.
I hope you liked it, and hope to see you again next week. Then we will be back on Wednesday again, so in our usual live stream slot. Of course, today, because for Intel NDA, it was on Thursday, but then back again on Wednesday. So I hope to see you again in 6 days. Same place, same time, different day. See you then.
Okay, thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.